Can a world champion like Lewis Hamilton fail completely because of an invisible error in his car? What if I told you that this error has been present from the beginning and nobody in Ferrari realized? Until now. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix represented a new opportunity for Ferrari. The urban circuit of Baku is unpredictable by nature, with its long lines combined with narrow sections, aggressive braking and 90-degree curves that expose both the strengths and weaknesses of any car. And for Hamilton, it was the perfect setting to show that its adaptation to SF-25 was moving forward, which was finally finding the rhythm. Friday's day was positive. Hamilton marked the best time in free training, even surpassing Verstappen. For the first time in the season, Ferrari's garage breathed optimism. From the wall began to talk about having found the correct configuration, that finally the simulator data coincided with the actual performance on the track. It seemed that the ghosts of the beginning of the year were dissipating. But as usually happens in Formula One, Friday's results do not always anticipate the real outcome of a weekend. On Sunday, during the race, Hamilton began to suffer a progressive fall in performance. The car became more unpredictable back after return. The average curves, which until then had taken confidently, began to betray their path. The acceleration in curve exit became erratic. And although from the wall they asked for calm, he felt that something was not functioning as he should. It was not a simple variation in tires. It was something deeper. Something invisible. Once the race was finished, the car key parameter check cross-reading telemetry began. Engineers began to notice inconsistencies in the power delivery of the SF-25 hybrid system. Irregular data in the deployment of the MGUK, anomalies in the efficiency of energy recovery. And the most alarming, those inconsistencies were not typical of Azerbaijan. They were present in previous races. They had been there from the beginning. No one had simply detected it clearly. What they discovered was that the hybrid system of the Hamilton car suffered a loss of chronic power that manifested mainly in critical acceleration moments. And being a progressive and not absolute failure, it did not activate any real-time alarm. The energy delivery was not cut, but did not respond linearly either. Between 10 and 20 horsepower were lost intermittently, enough to compromise qualifying laps, curve exits and straight defenses. These types of failures are the most treacherous. Not because they leave the car unusable, but because they degrade performance so subtle that the pilot begins to doubt himself. To believe that it is your driving style that does not fit, that needs to adapt more, which is making imperceptible mistakes. And in the case of Hamilton, that was exactly the effect. For weeks, engineers had tried to justify the lack of rhythm with standard arguments. Difference in piloting styles with respect to Leclerc, learning curve with the new environment, sensitivity to configurations. It was even insinuated that Hamilton was taking longer than expected to understand how SF-25 worked. But the data does not lie. Once the anomaly was identified, all telemetry patterns fit. The problem was manifested especially in traction curves, where the ERS energy should be combined with the turbo to deliver the optimal motor torque. And that was where Hamilton wasted time without explanation. His trace was clean. Your braking precise. But the acceleration did not arrive. Now they knew why. What Ferrari engineers discovered in Azerbaijan was not limited to an electrical failure or a defective unit. It was just the symptom. The really disturbing was the structural cause that caused it. And that cause is directly linked to how the SF-25 was conceived since its birth. Once the energy failure was partially corrected, telemetry began to show another more disturbing truth. The car did not respond consistently. It was not enough to change the motor map or modify the aerodynamic balance. Even in sessions where everything seemed to be within the ideal parameters, the car behaved erratically. What worked in a curve failed in the next. What seemed stable in classification disappeared in the race. In practice, this translates into a frustrating experience for the pilot. In medium-speed curves, where absolute precision is needed to maintain rhythm, the car begins to subvira. And he does it right at the most delicate moment of the tracing. When the pilot has released the brake, he pointed the nose to the vertex and needs confidence to accelerate. But that trust never comes. Because the front axle does not respond. Because the ground does not generate sufficient load. Because the car is not in its window. Azerbaijan is a brutal circuit for braking systems. With extremely long straight lines followed by low-speed curves, discs and tweezers are subjected to constant thermal stress. It is a path where cooling is as critical as power. And in that scenario, Ferrari presented one of the biggest weak points of SF-25. During the post-carrier analysis, the data showed that the temperatures in the Hamilton car brake system consistently exceeded the limit values established by the supplier. The graphs showed peaks of more than 1000 degrees Celsius in key moments of the stint, especially on the front axle. It was not momentary overheating. It was sustained. Almost every return under conditions of career rhythm became a latent threat. This behavior not only affects braking efficiency, the stability of the car also impacts directly. When the brakes exceed their ideal thermal window, the friction coefficient is drastically reduced. The pedal becomes spongy, the pressure is not transmitted correctly, and the braking point changes without warning. For the pilot, that is like losing the ground under the feet at more than 300 kilometers per hour. In the case of Hamilton, this problem resulted in a progressive impairment of trust. Return after return, I noticed that the car took longer to stop, that the front train responded with less firmness, that he had to constantly adjust his braking reference. But the most frustrating thing is that from the wall, the situation was not entirely evident. Because in normal conditions, these peaks may seem part of the expected behavior in Baku. However, when the data was compared with the Leclerc car, the difference was clear. Monegasco's car temperatures were maintained within a more controlled range. Something in Hamilton's car, whether the airflow configuration or a combination of geometry and brake ducts, was causing a dangerous imbalance. The SF-25 not only had a binary design in terms of aerodynamics, he also had it in his cooling system. Its ability to evacuate heat depended on the car operating in an extremely specific window of aerodynamic load and braking pressure. A small deviation in these parameters turned the system into a thermal trap. And the most alarming is not just loss of performance, it is physical risk. Under sustained overheating conditions, discs can crystallize, the clamps fail, and the compound of the pills degrade in an abrupt way. In urban circuits, where there are no generous escapes and where the walls are a few meters from the asphalt, any braking failure becomes a potential accident. Hamilton knew it, I felt it, and he reported it several times by radio. His tone was not of competitive frustration, but of genuine concern. I knew I wasn't in a position to fight, and worse, that it was exposed. These types of problems have a double cost. On the one hand, they force the pilot to make defensive decisions that limit their performance. On the other, they erode the relationship of trust with the car. When a pilot stops trusting the brakes, all the driving style is affected. You can no longer attack the curve. You can no longer defend in braking. Stint's emotional control is lost. And that, in Formula One, is a sentence of mediocrity. The case of SF-25 is much more than a simple technical crisis. It is an emergency call to all Ferrari levels. Because it is discovered in Azerbaijan is not a timely or isolated problem. It is a reflection of something much deeper. A car conception that is not aligned with the real demands of the championship, and a technical management that at times has seemed blind to the obvious. The implications of this situation are multiple and dangerous. On a technical level, the biggest challenge is not to repair a piece or adjust a configuration. It is reconfiguring the design philosophy of a car in the middle of the season. And in modern Formula One, that is almost a suicidal mission. The car was already approved. The chassis cannot be modified radically. The limitations of the technical and budgetary regulations force any solution to being surgical, non-surgical in mechanical terms, but in strategic terms. Precise, fast, low cost, and highly effective. But with a problem as systemic as that of SF-25, how can that be achieved? In theory, it is possible to attack layers and layers, improve cooling through new ducts, reconfigure the ERS map to avoid energy losses, adjust the rake and suspension to slightly expand the soil operational window. But all that requires time, analysis time, production time, time on track. And the season does not expect. It is no longer about adaptation. This is resistance, of enduring a car that does not respond, to fight the frustration of knowing that everything is taking place without receiving anything. Hamilton is one of the most consistent pilots in history, but he even needs a machine that allows him to run. And the SF-25 today is not giving it. What happened in Baku has marked a before and after in the narrative of the 2025 season. We are no longer talking about a bad streak, lack of adaptation, or isolated human errors. We are facing a structural crisis, an open wound in Ferrari's technical heart. And the most disturbing thing is that there is no quick cure. There is no simple solution. The discovery of the hybrid failure, the revelation of binary design, the latent risk in the brakes. Everything converges in an undeniable reality. The SF-25 is a car that betrays its own pilot. A car that promises performance but delivers instability. That demands perfection but lives in chaos. Do you think Ferrari has what is necessary to reverse this situation? Can a team with such talent and resources find humility to correct your path? Or are we witnessing the slow agony of the most ambitious project in recent years in Formula One?